Hello and welcome to this episode of Trash to Track. In this episode we're going to be looking at one of the oldest models I've worked on. This Triang Princess, which belongs to a friend of mine, was picked up at a car boot sale and dates, according to the Hornby website, to about 1957. This is an old engine, and as you can see, with age has come grubbiness. It is covered in dirt and dust. There is a sticker mark on the cab roof. There is surface rust showing on some of the parts, so we're going to have to give this Princess a thorough overhaul. Later on we'll be looking at a separate loco, which was released in the 1960s. But for now we'll concentrate on this one. You can tell it's an early model because it has the early type coupling there from Triang, and this tender is heat pressed together and you can't seem to be able to take it apart. Giving it a quick battery test, the Princess does run, but it's very juddery, so it will need a good clean-up after 65 years of use. To remove the body shell from this loco, it is quite simple. You simply undo this flat-headed screw on the front of the buffer beam there, and once the screw has been released, the body shell simply lifts off two clips at the back near the cab. Inside we have the standard Triang X04 motor and the TV suppressor there in white, but I am concerned by looking at the coil plates on this. There does seem to be some moisture damage, although putting the battery directly to the brushes, it does look to be a strong runner. I'm going to strip this loco right down to its component parts to give it a thorough clean, and by removing the front pony truck and the rear pony truck, these are held in place just by two flat-headed brass screws, we can see some of the wear and tear. The magnet on this loco is really strong and was pulling the screwdriver out of my hand when I was attempting to release the screw to release the motor. There is some fluff and crud all in the back of this, so it will need a thorough clean. Testing this motor with the battery direct to the brush terminal shows that it is quite a strong runner, but it will need a lot of cleaning and lubrication. Testing the magnet with a screwdriver proves that this magnet is extremely strong and will not need any remagnetising. It has kept its magnetism throughout the last 50 to 60 years. I'm going to be using a plastic tub to keep the parts in this time, as none of the brass parts are magnetic, and a magnetic tray is full of parts from another loco for an upcoming Trash to Track that I was waiting parts for. To release the brushes on these X04 motors, you just simply push the retaining spring in and they both fall out. They look to be slightly worn and they are covered in carbon deposits, but they're far from being useless, so we'll give them a clean up. The armature plate needs cleaning up as well, so we'll do that and then clean all the carbon deposits out from inside the motor. Using my tried and tested method of methylated spirits and a cotton bud, I simply dip the cotton bud in mess and then put it on the armature and turn the armature with finger pressure, and this cleans it. As you can see, there is a lot of dirt on this from its many years of running around, probably on carpets and children's train sets, judging by the condition it's in. Once the armature's been cleaned, I use a shaved down toothpick to clean in between the armature plates. This is imperative, as a build-up of carbon here can cause short circuits, can burn the motor out and prevent good even running. The brushes, as I said, are covered in carbon deposits, so I'm going to be putting them in this plastic tub and using some contact cleaner to clean them. I'll leave them to soak in there for about 20 minutes and then clean it off with a cotton bud, and it seems to work really well. Once they're inside the tub, seal the lid on and agitate it slightly. The second loco we're going to be looking at today is this green Princess that actually belongs to my dad. This has been retrieved from his loft and is due for a good service, as this hasn't ran in decades. It's not going to be good enough to DCC fit this, as my dad's layout is code 75 and the wheels on this are just too deep to be run. But I'm going to service it and get it into running condition anyway. The battery test proves that it is actually quite a good runner already, and the bodywork is absolutely mint condition, so I'm not going to need to do much. It's interesting to compare these two Princesses. The green one is from the late 60s and this black one is from the late 50s. And you can see how much more detail Triang Hornby added throughout the period of its life in this model. The body shell doesn't look too much different, apart from the buffer beams where buffer shanks were added instead of the buffers just being pushed into the body shell as they are on the black one. Stripping down my dad's Princess is exactly the same as the early model. Releasing the front screw allows the body shell to be lifted off, and we have exactly the same motor setup inside, although the TV suppressor in this one is actually hidden by a yellow piece of plastic. The armature plates on my dad's model haven't gone funny, and this looks to be in quite good condition. I do remember this running on my dad's layout when I was a child, so I know it's had a fair bit of use. But there is some hair and some fluff all inside there, so it's going to need another thorough clean. As I said, disassembling this Princess is exactly the same as the one we did before, so speeding up the footage just to strip it down into its component parts. I put these in a separate tub so not to get the parts mixed up. The magnet on my dad's model is also extremely strong, so this will not need remagnetising either. It's funny how some X04 motors retain their magnetism whilst others lose it over a period of time and become virtually useless. Now, I was stripping down the X04 motor on my dad's model and cleaning the armature plates and brushes exactly as I did before when I noticed something peculiar. On one of the armature plates on my dad's model there is a gouge out of it. Now, I don't know if this is a manufacturing error or whether or not it's damage been caused during use. It doesn't appear to affect its running, but it's just an unusual feature, something I've never seen on one of these motors before. Going back to the original motor, now it's time to start reassembling this, and it's quite simple by putting the brushes up using a pair of tweezer nose pliers and then holding them in place with the retaining spring with your finger like that, and then replacing the other brush, and then the motor is reassembled ready for testing. I've also lubricated this and filled the felt pads on this with oil as they were completely bone dry. This model probably hasn't been lubricated since it left the Triang factory in 1957. Giving it a quick battery test, and it proves that the motor is now running nicely, so we can move on to looking at the rest of the early Princess. To clean the pickups, I'm going to use some Brasso on a cotton bud to polish these up to a nice shine and get all the dirt and muck and tarnish off them that has happened over the last 70 years. This Brasso really does clean these brass pickups nicely. This method was used on my dad's Princess as well. The connecting rods and side rods on the original black Princess are quite dirty. They are covered in a film of surface rust and grime, so I'm going to strip these off. To remove them, all you do is simply remove this small flat-headed screw from the centre driving wheel there, which, if you note, is flangeless to allow it to go around train set curves of the 50s and 60s. And then everything simply just pulls out and away. Be careful not to lose that tiny washer that acts as a spacer on the side rods. The same method was used on the other side. To relieve the cylinder block, you simply undo this small screw and it's held in with this tiny washer and clips into the die-cast chassis frame. This allows you to lift the cylinder block off to release all the side rods. These were put into a plastic tub and they were given a good cleaning with contact cleaner. Upon removing the side rods, it becomes apparent there that is some surface rust on one of those driving wheels, and we'll address this later. As you can see there was quite a bit of muck come off them even before we'd started cleaning them. The chassis block and wheels had a film of grease and dirt on them, so I put it in this tub with some paper to absorb it and give it a liberal soaking in contact cleaner just to clean all the crap off this. Giving it a wipe with the blue towel, and then I've been upstairs and got my wife's toothbrush again, although I did receive quite a good kicking last time, but it's not going to deter me. I'm still going to use it, and I use it to clean off all the manky parts on this chassis. To remove the surface rust, I give the wheels and the chassis block a polishing with this brass brush in my Dremel multi-tool. You don't want to go too heavily with this, as you don't want to remove the surface finish. All you want to do is remove the surface rust. And then using the brass brush, I also put it on the wheel treads and clean all the wheels as we go. This has removed the tarnish after nearly 70 years of running. Once that's been done, I clean the wheels then with a cotton bud and some methylated spirits just to remove any residue that's left over. There was quite a bit of residue left over from the brass brush, so I don't know whether or not I'd use that method again in the future, as it seemed to clean them really well, but did leave a lot of black muck on the wheel treads that took some time to clean off. You also have to clean the wheel backs on one side of the model, as remember this picks up electric from one side. As we cleaned the pickups of this earlier on, they would be pointless cleaning them if all you're going to do is then put them back onto dirty wheels. The contact cleaner seems to have done a good job on the side rods. They're not completely clean, but as you can see in the bottom of that tub, the amount of grease and muck that come off these was incredible. Now they're on the blotting paper, all I'm going to do is give them a quick rub over with a dry cotton bud to remove any residue, and it also removes the hard to reach grime. As you can see there, these are quite filthy, but they will shine like a new pin once I'm finished cleaning them in this method. It also removes any old oil or lubrication on the crank pins. Turning to the body shell and the tender, I use this plastic tub again and fill it with warm water with fairy liquid, and the body shell is placed in and will be given a good scrub with an old toothbrush. The tender was also given a good wash, but you have to be careful with the tender as it has a metal weight in it and I couldn't take it apart, so once the tender was cleaned it was set aside over a heater to dry quickly to prevent any rust build-up. There was a lot of muck on this model after all these years, and it also, using the toothbrush and hot water, also removed that price sticker off the cab roof and most of its residue. Cleaning models like this is quite satisfactory as they come out shining. Sometimes they can remove the paint, as we've seen in the past, but with these self-coloured plastic bodies it's actually come out quite nice. The tender was also given a good scrub and all the dust and crud that had accumulated on it was removed. I'll give that toothbrush a quick wash, let that dry and put it back upstairs. Hopefully she won't notice. I leave them to dry overnight, as I said, and the tender was given a blast with a hairdryer just to get any moisture out from inside. We're going to have a quick comparison now as to this. This is, as I said, an early 1957 Triang model. And as you can see there, the toothbrush didn't remove all the crud, but we're going to have to do something about that coupling. Using a pair of long nose pliers, I gently grip them and try and straighten out the coupling hook, as this has obviously had some sort of impact in the past and has bent it. Working gently, because I don't want to break the coupling in case the metal is fatigued, I managed to straighten it out quite nicely and return it to some sort of use. But it has got a lot of surface rust on it, so again out comes the wire brush, and remember, please use eye protection with this as the bristles on this brush can fly off. And working gently I remove all the surface rust off the tender coupling. You don't want the brush to come in contact with the plastic body or the buffers, as it will ruin them. So it is a gentle process to remove all the surface rust on this. I also removed the corrosion from the tender draw hook on the front of the tender, again going carefully not to touch the plastic, but it actually comes out quite nice, and I've straightened the coupling out, so this is back ready for some sort of service. For a model that is 70 years old, the detail on it isn't too bad, although that heat pressed British Railway logo on the side there leaves a lot to be desired. Comparing it to my dad's tender from the later models, you can see they use transfers, and there are quite a number of differences. This has got open axles and is screwed together so it can be taken apart. It's got the later coupling and footsteps on the back of the tender. We're now going to have to address this massive crack that's in the front of the buffer beam on the loco. So what I'm going to use is my super glue and baking powder method. I'm going to apply a liberal amount of super glue from the inside of the model so that it's not visible on the outside, clamp it together and then add the baking powder to facilitate the chemical bond between the two. This proves a very strong joint and it's almost akin to plastic welding. I picked this tip up off Marty's Matchbox Makeovers when he was restoring his die-cast models, and it really does work a treat. You don't need a lot of baking powder, just enough to cover the super glue, and then just shake it around like that so it covers it all, and then leave it to thoroughly set. Any of the baking powder that's left over can be brushed away with a stiff paintbrush. To reassemble this model, the cylinder block clips into that gap there in the die-cast chassis and is held back in place by the washer and the screw. Be careful not to lose any of these parts, as they will be quite hard to replace afterwards. Gripping the screw in a pair of fine nose pliers, or once I can get hold of it that is, I hold it in place and then tighten the screw up with the flat bladed screwdriver. Now I'm going to ask any of the viewers out there if they know the answer to this question, but there seems to be an S cast into the chassis casting there. Does anybody know what this means, or is it just a manufacturer's mark of some sort? We're now going to replace the cylinders. We're now going to replace the side rods, and the side rods are handed. This part always faces towards the rear. So put the crank pins in the two outer wheels holes, like so, and it just simply push fits. And then I'm going to lubricate this with some modelling oil, just so that it eases the running of this model when it's running, as the metal on metal will cause friction, and it should have some sort of lubrication. You don't need a lot of oil, just enough to leave a film on the metal parts to prevent any further corrosion in the future. The piston rod is then placed into its holder and given a move up and down to spread the oil. Once that's in place, it's time to put on the spacer washer, followed by the connecting rod, and then the small screw goes in, and tighten it up to secure it all in place. Try not to over tighten it, as you can damage the threads on these models as they're so old. Also, tightening it up too much will prevent the model from running freely. The same process was repeated on the other side, and we give it a quick roll test there to make sure that all is good. Once both sides have been done, I give it a quick roll test on a piece of track, and as you can see, this chassis and the side rods roll freely, so that's that part done. Before I go any further, I'm going to lubricate the crank pins and any moving parts on the side rods that we didn't oil before. This will just ease in running and prevent any corrosion in the future. I also put some oil on the axles, as they have all been cleaned off with that contact cleaner, so we'll need re-lubricating. You don't need much oil, just enough to create a surface film. That's all that's required. Too much and the oil will fly off when you're running your model, and then you'll have to clean your track. The pony truck and the rear truck didn't need much doing to them, to be honest. They just had a good dusting over with a stiff brush, and the wheels were cleaned with, again, a cotton bud dipped in methylated spirits. The surface rust on the trailing truck was removed again with the brass brush in a Dremel, just to remove the surface rust and prevent it from growing any bigger in the future. These were then replaced onto the chassis block using the flat bladed brass screws. The pony truck on this model, as it's a very early one, is quite small and looks a bit out of place. As you will see later, comparing it to my dad's later model, the pony truck was a lot bigger and made the model look a bit better. Now we're going to thread the wires back through the chassis that we removed earlier when we cleaned it, and ensure that it goes on the correct way round to pick up the electric, and then we can screw the chassis keeper plate back in place. Again, do not over tighten these screws, as you don't want to damage the thread or damage that Formica base plate there, as if it cracks you'll have to look for a spare one. Last but not least to go in is the motor, which simply clips back in its slot there and is screwed back in using the small flat bladed screwdriver. As you can see there, the magnet was pulling the screwdriver towards it and it made it quite difficult. Testing again with the battery, you can see there that it is a very powerful runner and the motor is running fine. So we're getting to the end of this rebuild now. The next thing to go on is the pickups that are screwed in directly into the chassis block with yet another brass flat bladed screw, and then the contact that goes in between the brush and complete the circuit. Giving this a quick battery test and we're well away. Now it's time to put some lubrication on the worm drive. In this case it's again the silicone grease I use from Hiley's Emporium. You don't need too much, just enough to cover the worm gear, and then add a little bit of oil. Everybody that's had Triang Exo4 motors will know that they can be extremely loud. But this one is one of the quietest running motors I've ever worked on of this type. So now it's all back together, as you can possibly hear. It is virtually silent. For an Exo4 motor, that is stunning. And in a model that is over 60 years old. I wonder if in 40 years, when my Hornby Class 50s are 60 years old, I wonder if they run as well as that. Now we've got the body shell back, you can see there that the glue and baking powder has repaired that quite nicely. It's a simple case of clipping the body shell back into place and then re-securing it with the front screw. As we've repaired the front of this model, it is advisable not to go hard with this screw, as the last thing I want to do is to screw it in too hard and then crack the body again. For a 70-year-old model, this isn't looking too bad. Another comparison we'll make with, this is the chassis of my dad's Princess, and you can see there that the spokes on the wheels are see-through, whereas the spokes on the model that we tested before were solid. This is what we started with then, or should I say this is what we ended up with. The 1957 vintage Triang Princess has been rebuilt, completely overhauled from the ground up. It's had a thorough cleaning, all the surface rust has been removed, the wheels have been cleaned, side rods cleaned, re-lubricated, and is ready for another, hopefully, 70 years of service. And my dad's Princess was done in the same way, although not so much work was required on this model, as this has been kept in a box in a loft and has not suffered from any damp corrosion. The green on these models looks really good, and I'm pleased to have reactivated this, although whether or not it will see any further use on my dad's layout is yet to be seen, as that's digital and code 75, and these models really aren't suited to it. So I'm back on my son's layout at the moment, as it's the only DC layout we've got, and we're going to test these princesses against each other. However, there was a problem that soon showed its head with the black princess. Although it looks like it's good at running here, I was resorted to just running it up and down a straight piece of track, as it would not run through the frogs on my son's pico points on his layout. It kept derailing. My dad's princess, however, would run round with no problems at all, as you'll see in a minute, and I was at a loss as to why this was. Having checked the back-to-backs of the wheels, they were identical, and then when I checked the flange depth, the flanges on the black princess, the early model, are a lot deeper by about 2mm, which prevents them from running over the frogs of modern points, and it caused a derailment. The same can be said with the tender wheels, so it was obvious that Triang made quite a few alterations to this model during its period of production. This is my dad's Princess bombing around the layout, as it should be for a Triang model, and as you can see it runs really sweetly, just like the black one does. It's just a shame that it doesn't run through points. They have a good turn of slow speed as well, considering their age and the motor that they've got in them. If you've got an engine you'd like to see featured on Trash to Track, please contact me on the email on screen and we can discuss sending it for a possible future overhaul and feature on the channel. Thanks again for watching Trash to Track. I'll leave you now with a couple of running shots of these princesses, and I'll catch you in the next one. Please like, share and subscribe. You can check out the Instagram page of Dans_model_railways or search Facebook for Dansmodelrailways Facebook page. Bye for now.